Ladies and gentlemen, how's it going? Once again, I'm Ned from Nev's Stack Bits, otherwise known as your friendly neighborhood basement dweller. Don't worry, ma'am, I am from the internet. And while I was going to the secondhand store, I found a slide viewer, digitizer. Basically, you could take your slides and turn it into images. Now, I thought the unit had broken. I checked out the SD card and I couldn't get any images off of it. I was about to I had already thrown out the slide digitizer and I still had the SD card and I was like, you know what, I'll give it one last shot. I throw it in a third and final unit and finally the thing works and I get images off of it, which is amazing. This collection of images seems to be from a married couple, multiple different multiple different vacations at multiple different times. I'm thinking it definitely seems to be a European thing that ends up back in Canada. It looks like they get married in Europe. It looks like they're in Bulgaria and Germany and France. Pictures from all kinds of times. You're not exactly sure. But anyways, I thought I'd mash them up together here and let you take a look. Found footage, tell me what you think, guys. Have a good one.
What flavours and forces, what seasons and climes do we not find mingled in it? It impresses us at one time as ancient, at another time as foreign, bitter and too modern. It is as arbitrary as it is pompously traditional. It is not infrequently roguish, still oftener rough and coarse. It has fire and courage, and, at the same time, the loose, dun-coloured skin of fruits which ripen too late. It flows broad and full, and suddenly there is a moment of inexplicable hesitation, like a gap that opens between cause and effect, an oppression that makes us dream, almost a nightmare. But already it broadens and widens anew the old stream of delight, the most manifold delight, of old and new happiness, including especially the joy of the artist in himself, which he refuses to conceal, his astonished, happy cognizance of his mastery of the expedients here employed, the new, newly acquired, imperfectly tested expedients of art, as he apparently betrays to us. All in all, however, no beauty, no south, nothing of the delicate southern clearness of the sky, nothing of grace, no dance, hardly a will for logic. A certain clumsiness even, which is also emphasized, as though the artist wished to say to us, "It is part of my intention." A cumbersome drapery, something arbitrarily barbaric and ceremonious, a flurring of learned and venerable conceits and witticisms, something German in the best and worst sense of the word, something in the German style, manifold, formless and inexhaustible, a certain German potency and superplenitude of soul, which is not afraid to hide itself under the raffinement of decadence, which, perhaps, feels itself most at ease there. A real genuine token of the German soul, which is at the same time young and aged, too ripe and yet still too rich in futurity. This kind of music expresses best what I think of the Germans. They belong to the day before yesterday and the day after tomorrow. They have, as yet, no today. 241. We good Europeans, we also have hours when we allow ourselves a warm-hearted patriotism, a plunge and relapse into old loves and narrow views. I have just given an example of it. Hours of national excitement, of patriotic anguish, and all other sorts of old-fashioned floods of sentiment. Duller spirits than we may only get done with what confines its operations in us to hours and plays itself out in hours, in a considerable time, some in half a year, others in half a lifetime, according to the speed and strength with which they digest and change their material. Indeed, I could think of sluggish, hesitating races, which, even in our rapidly moving Europe, would require half a century ere they could surmount such atavistic attacks of patriotism and soil attachment, and return once more to reason, that is to say, to good Europeanism. And while digressing on this possibility, I happened to become an ear witness of a conversation between two old patriots. They were evidently both hard of hearing, and consequently spoke all the louder. "He has as much, and knows as much philosophy as a peasant or corps student," said the one. "He is still innocent. But what does that matter nowadays? It is the age of the masses. They lie on their belly before everything that is massive. And so also in politicis. A statesman who rears up for them a new Tower of Babel, some monstrosity of empire and power, they call great. What does it matter that we more prudent and conservative ones do not meanwhile give up the old belief that it is only the great thought that gives greatness to an action or affair? Supposing a statesman were to bring his people into the position of being obliged henceforth to practice high politics, for which they were by nature badly endowed and prepared, so that they would have to sacrifice their old and reliable virtues out of love to a new and doubtful mediocrity. Supposing a statesman were to condemn his people generally to practice politics, when they have hitherto had something better to do and think about, and when in the depths of their souls they have been unable to free themselves from a prudent loathing of the restlessness, emptiness, and noisy wranglings of the essentially politics-practising nations. Supposing such a statesman were to stimulate the slumbering passions and avidities of his people, were to make a stigma out of their former diffidence and delight in aloofness, an offence out of their exoticism and hidden permanency, were to depreciate their most radical proclivities, subvert their consciences, make their minds narrow and their tastes national. What? A statesman who should do all this, which his people would have to do penance for throughout their whole future, if they had a future, such a statesman would be great, wouldn't he? "Undoubtedly," replied the other old patriot vehemently. "Otherwise he could not have done it. It was mad perhaps to wish such a thing. But perhaps everything great has just been mad at its commencement." "Misuse of words," cried his interlocutor contradictorily. "Strong, strong, strong and mad, not great." The old men had obviously become heated as they thus shouted their truths in each other's faces. But I, in my happiness and apartness, considered how soon a stronger one will become master of the strong, and also that there is a compensation for the intellectual superficializing of a nation, namely in the deepening of another. 242. Whether we call it civilization, or humanizing, or progress, which now distinguishes the European, whether we call it simply, without praise or blame, by the political formula, the democratic movement in Europe, behind all the moral and political foregrounds pointed to by such formulas, an immense physiological process goes on, which is ever extending, the process of the assimilation of Europeans, their increasing detachment from the conditions under which, climatically and hereditarily, united races originate, their increasing independence of every definite milieu, that for centuries would fain inscribe itself with equal demands on soul and body, that is to say, the slow emergence of an essentially supranational and nomadic species of man, who possesses, physiologically speaking, a maximum of the art and power of adaptation as his typical distinction. This process of the evolving European, which can be retarded in its tempo by great relapses, but will perhaps just gain and grow thereby in vehemence and depth. The still raging storm and stress of national sentiment pertains to it, and also the anarchism which is appearing at present. This process will probably arrive at results on which its naive propagators and panegyrists, the apostles of modern ideas, would least care to reckon. The same new conditions under which, on average, a levelling and mediocrising of man will take place, a useful, industrious, variously serviceable and clever herd animal like man, are in the highest degree suitable to give rise to exceptional men of the most dangerous and attractive qualities. For, while the capacity for adaptation, which is ever trying changing conditions, and begins a new work with every generation, almost with every decade, makes the powerfulness of the type impossible, while the collective impression of such future Europeans will probably be that of numerous, talkative, weak-willed, and very handy workmen who require a master, a commander, as they require their daily bread. While, therefore, the democratizing of Europe will tend to the production of a type prepared for slavery in the most subtle sense of the term, the strong man will necessarily in individual and exceptional cases become stronger and richer than he has perhaps ever been before, owing to the unprejudicedness of his schooling, owing to the immense variety of practice, art and disguise. I meant to say that the democratizing of Europe is at the same time an involuntary arrangement for the rearing of tyrants, taking the word in all its meanings, even in its most spiritual sense. 243. I hear with pleasure that our sun is moving rapidly towards the constellation Hercules, and I hope that the men on this earth will do like the sun, and we foremost, we good Europeans. 244. There was a time when it was customary to call Germans deep by way of distinction. But now that the most successful type of New Germanism is covetous of quite other honours, and perhaps misses smartness in all that has depth, it is almost opportune and patriotic to doubt whether we did not formerly deceive ourselves with that commendation. In short, whether German depth is not at bottom something different and worse, and something from which, thank God, we are on the point of successfully ridding ourselves. Let us try, then, to relearn with regard to German depth. The only thing necessary for the purpose is a little vivisection of the German soul. The German soul is above all manifold, varied in its source, aggregated and superimposed rather than actually built. This is owing to its origin. A German who would embolden himself to assert, "Two souls, alas, dwell in my breast," would make a bad guess at the truth. Or, more correctly, he would come up far short of the truth about the number of souls. As a people made up of the most extraordinary mixing and mingling of races, perhaps even with a preponderance of the pre-Aryan element, as the people of the centre in every sense of the term, the Germans are more intangible, more ample, more contradictory, more unknown, more incalculable, more surprising, and even more terrifying than other peoples are to themselves. They escape definition, and are thereby alone the despair of the French. It is characteristic of the Germans that the question, "What is German?" never dies out among them. Kotzebue certainly knew his Germans well enough. "We are known," they cried jubilantly to him, but Sand also thought he knew them. Jean-Paul knew what he was doing when he declared himself incensed at Fichte's lying but patriotic flatteries and exaggerations. But it is probable that Goethe thought differently about Germans from Jean-Paul, even though he acknowledged him to be right with regard to Fichte. It is a question what Goethe really thought about the Germans. But about many things around him he never spoke explicitly, and all his life he knew how to keep an astute silence. Probably he had good reason for it. It is certain that it was not the wars of independence that made him look up more joyfully, any more than it was the French Revolution, the event on account of which he reconstructed his Faust. And indeed the whole problem of man was the appearance of Napoleon. There are words of Goethe in which he condemns with impatient severity, as from a foreign land, that which Germans take a pride in. He once defined the famous German turn of mind as indulgence towards its own and others' weaknesses. Was he wrong? It is characteristic of Germans that one is seldom entirely wrong about them. The German soul has passages and galleries in it. There are caves, hiding places, and dungeons therein. Its disorder has much of the charm of the mysterious. The German is well acquainted with the bypaths to chaos. And, as everything loves its symbol, so the German loves the clouds and all that is obscure, evolving, crepuscular, damp and shrouded. It seems to him that everything uncertain, undeveloped, self-displacing and growing, is deep. The German himself does not exist. He is becoming. He is developing himself. Development is therefore the essentially German discovery and hit in the great domain of philosophical formulas, a ruling idea which, together with German beer and German music, is labouring to Germanize all Europe. Foreigners are astonished and attracted by the riddles which the conflicting nature at the basis of the German soul propounds to them. Riddles which Hegel systematized and Richard Wagner has in the end set to music. Good-natured and spiteful. Such a juxtaposition, preposterous in the case of every other people, is unfortunately only too often justified in Germany. One has only to live for a while among Swabians to know this. The clumsiness of the German scholar and his social distastefulness agree alarmingly well with his psychical rope dancing and nimble boldness, of which all the gods have learnt to be afraid. If anyone wishes to see the German soul demonstrated ad oculus, let him only look at German taste, at German arts and manners. What boorish indifference to taste! How the noblest and the commonest stand there in juxtaposition!